Hello everybody and welcome to my video. My name is Kelsey and in this video I am going to be discussing what I made during the spring 2025 season. It is a very hot and sunny day here in Salt Lake City and I'm currently wearing a wool shawl, so apologies if I look like I have just forded 7 rivers because I am damp, I'm hot, and I am sweaty, and I've turned off all the fans in this room in order to maintain a somewhat level of quality. It's been a second since I filmed, so long in fact that I had to look and see what was the last video I put up, and I realized that it was my local yarn store day and Great Basin Fiber Arts Fair haul, and considering that in the next 2 weeks I will be participating in Utah Yarn Crawl, I wanted to make sure that there were at least 1 or 2 videos in between that so I don't look completely deranged. So with that being said, let's get into what I made during this year's spring quarter. I'm classifying spring as April, May, and June. Just a quick overview of how I felt before I put the notes for this video together. I went into planning this video thinking I didn't actually make a lot, and I think that was partially because there was an item that I really wanted to make this spring that I didn't get to because I kind of impulsively cast on another top, which we'll get to, and I don't think I'm gonna end up getting to that top at all this year. So there was just a little bit of like lingering disappointment in regards to that, and I think it just like made me feel like the rest, like I wasn't productive at all. And while going through this video, I realized that that was not true. I was in fact pretty productive, and I think that is probably a pro of doing this kind of video, is to show myself that just because I didn't do exactly what I thought I was going to do doesn't mean I didn't do anything. So without further ado, let's get into the first item I worked on this spring, and that is the Dandelion Dance Shawl by Fiber and Fox. This was a cast on, well, it's crochet, so it's crochet. It wasn't cast on, but you know what I mean. I started this on February 18th of 2025, but it wasn't really a priority for me at that point. It was just kind of like my background crochet project, which is how a lot of my crochet projects, I classify them. It's just, I primarily am knitting right now, but every once in a while I want to do something different. I want to shake it up, so I always have a crochet project going on. This was that. I finished this one just in time for Easter. I finished it on April 10th, and as I was working on it, because I had Easter on the brain, I realized that this is a very Easter color palette, and I started calling it my peep shawl because of that. The yarn I used is all Lovejoy Fiber Superwash Merino DK that I got from Seed Stitch in Bountiful, Utah. The colorways are Coral Blaze, Lemon Nova, Supernova, and Clover. The process for this shawl. Overall, this shawl really had to grow on me. I actually didn't even like it until after it was done and like the second time I wore it, because I've never worn a shawl before, I've never made a shawl before, so I just wasn't in love with it, and it was really awkward to style initially. I'll put up some of the pictures I took. That is not my favorite outfit I wore with this shawl. The ones I took pictures of it with and put on my Instagram, it was just what I put together when I was still kind of awkwardly trying to figure out how this would work. But I ended up accidentally buying a green shirt that was not clean, so I couldn't wear it for this video, but I bought a green shirt that basically is like a perfect like tonal match for the green in this sweater, or in this shawl. It's a little bit darker, and wearing it with that shirt made me actually really like this, and it's like kind of very comfortable to just have. I brought it to a theater show a couple weeks ago in case it was cold in the theater, and it was just very easy to like throw over my lap, and just like it wasn't too obnoxious like a jacket would be. So I ended up actually really liking this, and it kind of made me want it made me like be open to the idea of casting on another shawl, because while making this process there was a little bit of kerfuffles, which goes into the modifications I had to do for this shawl. So overall, I followed the pattern for this shawl almost exactly up to a point. But however, I realized that my crochet tension, I don't know what's going on with it. I don't know what's wrong with it. I don't know what has happened. But my like single crochets are very tight. And you can see in this bottom how like it kind of has wrinkled, and like it's definitely blocked out a little bit, but it was really curling as I was going on, and it's still kind of like very tight around the edge in a way I don't think it should be. And then you can see areas where it like probably is not exactly how it should be. So my tension ended up being very tight, which ended up affecting the length and the drapiness of the shawl in a way I wasn't super in love with. So after this pink section right here, I ended up adding an extra section with some other parts of the yarn, and I did like a couple sections of V-stitch. I think I alternated half double crochet V-stitches with double crochet V-stitches just to add like a little bit more length to it, and I do think that was a good choice. However, I do think if your tension is correct, you probably shouldn't have to do it, and I don't think it adds much if your length is already at a length that you like if it's already where you want it to be, then yeah, you definitely don't have to do that. Next time I would probably size up a hook, and I would probably get rid of the V-stitch section entirely. Additionally, my next finished objects are kind of attached to this shawl. I didn't really take good notes on them, so I don't know when I started or finished them really, but I did want to throw them in here. I had scrap yarns from the shawl, and I didn't really want to keep it around because it was a pretty small amount, so I ended up casting on some scrunchies to go with the shawl. I first cast on this green one. Actually, I don't know if this one was first. I did this green one out of obviously the green scrap yarn. And this is just a bunch of triple crochets that are like increased stitches, and then I did the same border I have on this shawl on the edge of the scrunchie. And then I'm also wearing one. It's this yellow and pink one. I'll take a picture of it when it's not in my hair. But this one I totally freehanded. It's definitely like the same where I did single crochet all around the elastic and then triple crocheted increased stitch, but then I also added a like second layer of like the pink yarn. Wouldn't recommend it. It was kind of difficult, and I think there's probably a better way to do it, but it ended up working out I think pretty well. It's cute, obviously I'm wearing it. So the next thing I cast on was kind of a product of like burnout. I was feeling very burnt out because I just finished a series of very long like crochet projects between this shawl and I had like a lot of like sweater tests for like crochet sweater tests at the beginning of the year that had really burnt me out on crochet. So I ended up deciding to cast on just like a real quick knitted garment out of some red mohair that I didn't end up using for the project I thought I was going to. In fact, I completely forgot that project. What I ended up making is the Curtsy Collar by Park Williams, or as she is known on Instagram as Park and Knit. I started this on April 11th and finished it on April 16th. So I basically worked on it through a long weekend. Like, it wasn't actually a long weekend, but I worked on it over the weekend from like a Friday to yada yada yada. This is in the Bichis and Bouchis Le Petit Silk and Mohair. I bought this from Handwork, which is a yarn store local to me here in Salt Lake City. It was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed it. I love how on the like edge where there's like the wrap around for the I-cord, she has you hold the mohair double during that section. And I think it just adds like such a lovely extra touch. I think I might be, yeah. And then I also, there's a section where I like snagged it on something and I don't really know how to fix it. So there is like a loose strand that wasn't there originally. That was me fucking up my own thing. I'm sorry, I'm hot. I'm taking this off. The only part I would say is like tedious is this like ruffle edge, just because you cast on a lot of extra stitches, so like you're kind of like cruising through like the rest of the collar, and then you get to the end and it like takes a lot longer to finish these rows. But I think overall it turned out really cute and I really like it. I bought for this project, I bought an I-cord, like one of the I-cord tools, because I wasn't about to cast on I wasn't about to hand knit an I-cord, and I would not recommend making this if you do not have one of those I-cord tools. I think it would just be too tedious. It probably would have taken me days to finish this I-cord, whereas with the I-cord tool I basically like in an hour had the I-cord I needed for this collar. In summary, I really love this project and I do want to make another one. I do have yarns and a plan to make it. I just didn't actually get around to casting it on, which I think we will discuss here in a second with my next finish object, which is a pair of socks. I've already worn these, so they're not like the most crisp pair of socks as they could be, but here they are. These are the Flu socks by Fabienne Gassman. I bought this pattern because the Heather and Shayla from the Charm City Unicorns both made a pair of these socks, and I had yarn that I had been holding together. I had a cashmere, like brushed cashmere yarn, and a BFL high twist sock yarn that I was holding together to make a scarf, and I decided to frog that scarf and instead make this pair of socks, and I am very happy that I did. They're not the most like versatile item, but they are really pretty and I am very proud of them. I will say they are a little big, and I'm still struggling with how to size my socks. I don't know if it's a tension thing that causes them to be a little big. I don't know if it was the BFL that causes them to be a little big, but that is a note. I can't remember if I said this, but I started these on April 17th of 2025 and I finished them on May 1st. While I was working on them, I had kind of a delusional hope that I would finish them and a matching cutesy collar in this purple yarn before the Great Basin Fiber Arts Fair, and then I realized pretty quickly that that absolutely was not going to happen, so I gave up and just accepted my fate. And I haven't actually got around to making the matching collar. I will at some point. I definitely want to, because I don't want to have this yarn laying around in stash. It's too expensive for that. Oh, speaking of the yarn is Moondrake Co. BFL High Twist is the body. It is in the color Water Lilies. I really enjoy this colorway. I do think Water Lilies is like the perfect name for it. It's like a lavender purple with like this turquoise mix in it, and then I also, ironically, it's the perfect match for that green shirt I was talking about, so I really should have worn that. Unfortunately, again, it's in the washing machine. Not much I can do about that. And then the purple yarn that the ruffle is made out of is Fua Fua. It is a brushed cashmere yarn, and it is in the colorway Fairy Godmother. Another really pretty color. The process of making these socks. This was actually the first time I utilized 2 sets of needles at the same time, because I do enjoy knitting socks on 9-inch circulars. However, I do not enjoy finishing a sock and then having to start another one before I can actually wear it. So what I ended up doing is I cast on like the cuff of both socks, finished to the next section of the instructions, which would have been the start of the ruffle. Then I did both of the first ruffles on each sock. Then I did obviously like the next set of instructions, the next ruffle, down to the heel on both, and like I just kind of went back and forth between the two, and that is how I intend on knitting my socks going forward, because it really made it like a lot easier and more bite-sized to accomplish. When I got to the foot of the sock, what I ended up doing is I would set a timer for 30 minutes to knit the body, and I would knit one sock for 30 minutes, then I would switch to the other one for another 30 minutes, and that basically like added the same amount of length to each sock as I was working on them, so I kind of kept them both in the same arena, so I never have to stop and go back. Interestingly enough, also, this little picot edge, I had never done something like it, and it actually was the thing that made me understand how lace knitting worked. And I'm not going to go into how it's done because obviously this is a paid for pattern, but I'm sure if you know more about knitting than me, you understand sort of the basics. I did make a modification to the sock at the end. I attempted the toe that is outlined in the pattern multiple times, and I just don't know why it wasn't clicking for me. Maybe it was because I'd been working on them and it was kind of late. I honestly don't know, but I tried them 3 times, had to rip out, and then finally I was like, screw it, and I just did the toe decreases for Summerlee toe sock, or for Summerlee sock, which is what I had done before. I'm not sure. It's definitely pretty messy. My decreases are a little bit funky, but you know, if it works, it works. And these socks are not exactly ones that are gonna get a shit ton of wear, so I am willing to accept that. The next 2 on my list are 2 items that I don't really have with me because they were gifts. The first one was the Oslo hat by Petite Knit. I've already knit one of these before, and I have many plans to knit more in the future because it is very much a good hat pattern, I will begrudgingly admit. But I ended up making this hat for my friend Kirsten for their birthday. The yarn I have for it is from the Sorella 'Tis the Season release, because Kirsten and I are both major fans of Taylor Swift. And in that release, they had a colorway named after a song, and the colorway was Kirsten's favorite color. So I ended up buying the colorway Ivy because it's the dark green that Kirsten loves. I did not originally intend on making a Oslo hat because I bought worsted weight yarn, but what happened is I had told Kirsten I was making them a hat out of Taylor Swift yarn, and then they started to get really excited about it, and I started to get very self-conscious about whether or not it was like gonna be boring. So I bought a patch off of Etsy that has like the Taylor Swift and like the folklore font to sew onto it. And I decided to do the Oslo hat because all the other worsted weight hats had like a ribbing, and I wasn't sure how sewing a patch onto ribbing would work. So I ended up pivoting to the Oslo hat. I started the hat on May 5th, finished it with time to spare before their birthday. I ended up doing modifications on the hat. And most of those just have to do with length of how long I was knitting something, because I was sort of playing yarn chicken with it, and I obviously did not want to run out of this yarn because there would not be a way for me to get more. So I ended up doing like a few inches less on the brim and also like on the body of the hat, but I don't think that messed with it too much. Kirsten has a big head, so it did fit. However, if I were to make it again, like if I were to go back in time and redo this process with what I know now, I would definitely size down the hat a little bit, because it ended up being kind of wide in a way that I didn't particularly like. However, Kirsten seemed okay with it, so I'm willing to let it go. So while I was working on that hat for Kirsten, I also got in my head that I needed to knit something for my dad for his birthday, which is ironic because I have yarn to make my dad a hat, but I decided that I would wait to make that for him for Christmas, because that way I wouldn't have to knit a bunch of things in May. And then I went ahead and decided to knit something anyway. However, I think it's okay because it's a little bit more seasonally appropriate than a winter hat in the middle of May, heading into summer. So what I ended up making was a hand knit golf club cover. I didn't write down who it was by, but I will put the pattern that I used in the description. I believe this one was a free pattern. I made the mistake of buying one and then deciding I didn't want to make that one, so then I bought a different one. Whatever. I started it on May 8th, finished it on May 11th, so it was very quick. I used Barocco Comfort Chunky in the colors Goldenrod and Lagoon. I think that's a little bit bigger of a yarn than as recommended. I think the pattern calls for a Aran. I think the Barocco Chunky is a worsted, but it's okay. I actually really enjoyed making this, which is kind of unfortunate because I don't know that there are any other circumstances where I would make something like this. Ironically enough, I think this is an unpopular opinion, but I think I really enjoy working with DPNs in the round, because it was very fun to just be like, I would just be like, okay, I'll get to the end of the DPN and I'll stop, and then I'll be like, okay, well might as well continue to the next DPN. So it was potato chippy in that way, and I don't think that experience is something everybody encounters. I enjoyed working with this yarn. I don't know is that I would work with it again because I tend to be more of a wool person. However, I would recommend it if you're in the market for that sort of thing. The only part of this project I really fucking hated was the pom-pom. That pom-pom was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I had made like 16 of them, and every single one I could not get the stitches tight enough so that the yarn wouldn't pull out. And eventually, like, I got it through a process of like just like sewing into the yarn with like a needle and like prayer, and I am still not happy with the security of that pom-pom. I used one of the Clover pom-pom makers, and I didn't really find anyone who had like the same experience where they just couldn't get it tight enough no matter what. And maybe it's just because the yarn I was using is very slippy. I don't know. I think it has like a nylon aspect to it. But it was horrible. It was horrible. It was horrible. It was horrible. So if you're using a pom-pom, if you recreate this exactly, use the exact same yarn, use the exact same thing. I used the largest Clover pom-pom maker. I think if I had used maybe the smaller one, that would have fixed something, but oh my gosh, it was terrible. And then the next thing I ended up making is my first ever knitted top. And I made it for Pride. And that is, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this. Got hair in my mouth. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this, but it is the Guava, and this is by oh, I didn't write that down either, but it's from Pom Pom magazine, and again, it'll be linked into the description down below. I wore this for the first time yesterday because I made it specifically for Pride. 3 points to you if you can figure out why exactly I made it for Pride. I have seen this pattern a lot on Ravelry because I like looking through the pom-pom patterns. They all like use a lot of really fun colors, and every single time I've seen this pattern, I've always been like, wow, that looks like a bunch of vaginas on a shirt. No offense to anyone who has made this and doesn't think like it looks and didn't think it looked like a bunch of vaginas. I hope I didn't like ruin it for you, but that is what it looks like to me, and I'm okay with that. And I was kind of debating whether or not I wanted to make something for Pride, and I remembered this shirt existed, and I was like, that would be so funny if I made that for Pride. And then I was like, I don't want to have to buy yarn for a vagina shirt to wear to Pride. And then I remembered I had a bunch of paint box cotton in vintage DK, paint box cotton in DK in the color vintage pink, that I had no plans for because I had bought for something else that it wasn't going to work out for. And I decided, yeah, I would cast on the funny project. And this unfortunately took the place of the mini mock neck tank that I really wanted to make this spring that I no longer think I'm going to get to this year. But, you know, we're going to have to live and learn. And, you know, I think all in all, I learned a lot from this project because obviously it was my first knit top. So I think maybe doing that on a garment that is a bunch of vaginas on a shirt, probably like that being my first garment is probably actually pretty useful, because like there are a lot of mistakes in the shirt and I learned a lot from it, and there are a lot of areas in which I can spot mistakes. However, because this is a shirt that has limited locations in which it is appropriate to wear, I do think it works out, because like it balances, because it's has mistakes and I learned from it, but also it's not something I would wear all the time anyway. It definitely is one of those things I wore with the knowledge that it wasn't going to be like an everyday wear. It was going to be for an event, and because I thought it was funny. I started it on April 24th after I finished the shawl, and then I continued working on it until June 17th. And I still worked on it a little bit longer. The knitting part of it was done. However, what I was working on was sewing on the little beads to help out some men folk spot something that they should know. But that was my friend Maddie's idea, and I thought it was just too funny, so I bought like little plastic pearl earrings and I embroidered them all on here, and I think it turned out cute. There are a lot of mistakes in this, like I said. However, this is a really comfortable shirt to wear, and you know, we gotta start somewhere. I am proud of myself for a very ambitious first garment, because in this garment it was my first lace project, it was my first time doing German short rows, it was my first time doing a shirt, it was my first time casting on stitches to like an additional like already like the stitches were already cast on and I was working. It was my first time casting on additional stitches, first time like joining in the round for the sleeves, so yeah. I think I'm proud of it, but I don't know how much I'm gonna wear it. And then the final thing I have to show you is actually a Christmas present. So I will let you like pause right here so you can go down into the comments and tell me how impressed you are with me, because I have started my gift knits for this year already. I made my grandmother another shawl. I think if you've been around and you've watched a couple videos, you will know that I made her a shawl last year, but it was a hellacious process because it was my first time ever doing Tunisian crochet, and it ended up being far too small. So she was joking with me on the phone this year and was like, "Are you gonna make me a shawl that fits this year?" And I said, "You know what, yeah, I'll do that." I had this yarn in stash. It is the Premier Puzzle yarn. It's just like an acrylic yarn I got from Walmart, and I cast on the Wildflower Chunky shawl. Again, I forgot to write the name of the person who did this. I started it on June 11th, finished it on June 21st. There were quite a few issues I had while making this shawl, not because of the pattern designer, it is because of my crazy crochet tension. So a super frustrating thing I discovered is that even though I was very tight on the other shawl I made a mere couple months ago, on this shawl I was apparently loose, and I'm not exactly sure how that happened. I used the hook size recommended, but I'm still not sure what happened, because I made the shawl essentially twice. I cast on my first shawl to the recommended chain length of the largest size, just kind of worked on that without thinking, and it was so ridiculously long. Like, it was down to my knees when it was wrapped around me like this, and I was standing up, so crazy long. I made my mom try it on, and it was ridiculous, because obviously I'm a big person, so it takes a little bit more fabric to wrap around me, but my mom is closer to my grandma, and it was absurd. So I ended up frogging the whole shawl, and I completely restarted from the chain. I ended up just casting on the chain until I was at a certain number, measuring it, and then comparing that measurement to the projected sizes on the pattern. So I cast on about, initially for my first shawl I cast on 73 stitches, I ended up casting on 101 for this version of the shawl, which is crazy. And I ended up measuring the length of the first shawl compared to what it should have been. It was supposed to be like 74 inches long. The shawl I made was like 150 inches long. So fucking crazy is all I'm gonna say about that. So like nearly double the length of the shawl. Additionally, this yarn, I don't know what happened to it, but it was the second ball I had a lot of problems with, because inside of it there were 6 ends, not even factory knots, just places where the yarn end, and then I had to reach into the gooch of the yarn and pull out another end, and I crochet for a little bit, and then there'd be another end. So that was a pro of frogging the first one, is that I could cut out the section where there just like was a million ends just randomly in there. And yeah, so for that reason, I wouldn't recommend the yarn. However, I do think it turned out nice, which is why it's so annoying that I had that issue where just shit was ending all the time. That all being said, this is my grandmother's shawl, and I'm very proud of this one as well, and I think she's gonna really like it. But that is all I worked on this spring season. Well, obviously not all I worked on this spring season. All I finished this spring season. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more coming up, please subscribe it, leave a comment, and like. If you have any questions about what I made and want more clarification on some of the modifications, let me know in the comment section down below. I don't know when it will be posted, but there will be a whip roundup for summer, and then some additional plans for the rest of summer that I will post at some point. Maybe I'm not going to commit to anything. But with that all being said, thank you all for being here. I hope to see you again in the future. I will try my hardest to live another day, so I will see you again. And thank you for watching.